The training world sat at the edge of space. It was a dry planet with red dust and 3 pale moons. The Empire had built their greatest warrior academy here. For 500 years, Young had come to this world to learn the ways of war. They were a proud species. They stood 7 feet tall with thick muscles and golden fur. Their faces looked like great lions from old Earth stories. They had sharp claws and long fangs. Their manes were thick and beautiful, and they took great pride in them. But most of all, they were proud of their voices. A roar could shake walls. It could make lesser species fall to their knees. It could stop hearts with pure fear. This was their greatest weapon. Before any battle, warriors would roar together. The sound would travel for miles. Their enemies would hear death coming for them. On this morning, the master stood in the training arena. He was old now, with gray in his mane, but his voice was still strong. He had killed over 200 enemies in his long life. Now his job was to train the next generation. 24 cubs stood before him in neat rows. They were young, barely past their 10th year. Their manes were still growing in, their claws were still soft, but they were learning. Every day they practiced the most important skill it could have. They practiced their battle cries. Again shouted at them. The cubs threw back their heads, they opened their mouths wide, and they roared. The sound was rough and uneven. Some voices cracked, some were too high, but there was power there, raw young power that would grow stronger with time. The observation windows rattled in their frames. Nodded slowly. Better, but not good enough. A true roar must reach your enemy before your blade does. It must enter their mind and plant fear there. When you roar, your enemy should already know they are dead. The cubs listened carefully. They had heard this lesson many times. They believed it completely. Strength announced itself. Power made itself known. This was the way. Above the arena, a long observation gallery looked down on the training ground. Today it was full of visitors. Diplomats and officers from many species had come to watch the famous training methods. Most of them stood far back from the windows. Even from this distance, the cubs' roars made them uncomfortable. Among these visitors stood a single human. Lieutenant was 32 years old. She had brown hair cut short and practical. Her eyes were dark and calm. She wore the simple gray uniform of the Terran Confederacy Diplomatic Corps. She was short by standards. She had no claws. She had no fangs. She had no mane. By every measure, she was weak. She had been assigned to as a cultural liaison. Her job was to observe and report. The Terran Confederacy wanted to understand their powerful neighbors better. Trade talks were coming soon. It was important to know how they thought. The cubs had noticed her on her first day. They had laughed at her small size. Some of the bolder ones had practiced their roars directly at her, trying to make her flinch or run. They wanted to see fear in her eyes. But had simply smiled at them. She did not flinch. She did not run. She did not even step backward. This confused the cubs greatly. Now, as training continued below, an officer stepped close to. His name was Iran, and he was in charge of visiting diplomats. "What do you think of our methods, Lieutenant?" he asked. There was pride in his voice. He expected her to be impressed. "Very interesting," said. Her voice was quiet and polite. "The cubs show great potential. They will be mighty warriors one day. The roar you hear now will shake battlefields in 10 years. "I am sure it will." Iran studied the small human. She was hard to read. Her face showed nothing. Her body language gave nothing away. This was strange. Most species were easy for to understand. They showed fear or respect or submission. Their bodies told the truth even when their words did not. But this human was like still water. He could not see what lay beneath. "Does your species have war cries?" Iran asked. "Thought about this? We have many different cultures. Some have battle songs, some have chants, some fight in complete silence." "Silence?" Iran made a sound of disbelief. "How does one fight in silence? How do you announce yourself to your enemy?" "Not all cultures believe in announcing themselves." Iran did not understand this. It seemed foolish to him. What was the point of being strong if you did not show it? What was the point of being dangerous if your enemy did not know to fear you? Below them was now teaching the cubs about stance. A good roar came from deep in the chest. The feet must be planted firmly. The spine must be straight. The lungs must be full of air. Watched everything carefully. She memorized the names of cubs as called them out for corrections. The largest with silver in his young mane, quick and eager, Thrain, who tried too hard, Mox, who did not try hard enough. She watched how they moved. She watched how they interacted. She watched who led and who followed. She saw the small politics of young people everywhere, the friendships and the rivalries, the competitions for status. The around her saw none of this. They saw only a small human with no claws and no fangs. They saw weakness standing where it did not belong. They did not see her watching. They did not notice her remembering. That night in their sleeping quarters, the cubs made plans, gathered 11 of his closest friends around him. "The human thinks she is brave," he said. "She does not run from our roars, she does not show fear." "Maybe she is deaf," suggested. "She is not deaf, she just does not understand what we are." His young voice was full of certainty. "Tomorrow we will teach her, we will surround her and show her what truly sound like, then she will run." The other cubs made sounds of agreement. This would be fun, this would prove their strength. They had no idea what was coming. Sat alone in her quarters, writing her daily report. She listed the names she had learned. She described the training methods she had observed. She noted the cubs who might become leaders one day. When she finished, she sat quietly for a long time. Then she smiled. Tomorrow would be interesting. The morning sun was red on. It painted the stone corridors of the training facility in shades of rust and copper. Most of the staff were already at their duties. The cubs had finished their morning meal and were supposed to be walking to the training arena. But 12 of them had other plans. Led the group through the corridors, they moved with purpose. They had studied the human's schedule. They knew she walked this particular hallway every morning. She used it to reach the observation gallery. She was always alone. "There," whispered. Walked toward them. She carried it in one hand. She was reading something on the screen. She seemed completely unaware of the young spreading out around her. The cubs moved quickly. They had practiced this. It was a traditional hunting formation. 2 blocked the corridor ahead. 2 blocked it behind. The rest spread out to fill the space. There was nowhere for the human to run. Stopped walking. She looked up from her. Her face showed no surprise. She simply looked at the cubs around her with calm, dark eyes. Stepped forward. He was nearly 6 feet tall now, bigger than the human woman. His silver-touched mane was bristling. He showed his fangs in what they called a dominance display. "You do not belong here, soft skin," he growled. His voice was deep for his age. Set down her on a nearby ledge. Her movements were slow and relaxed. "Good morning." The cub stopped. He had not told her his name. How did she know it? He pushed the confusion aside. "We have decided something. We have decided to show you what real warriors sound like." His chest swelled with pride. "You think you are brave because you do not run from practice roars. You think you are strong because you do not flinch." The other cubs were growling now. The sound filled the corridor. It echoed off the stone walls. It vibrated in the air. "But you have not heard us really try," continued. "When we truly roar, you will understand. You will submit or you will flee. Those are your choices." Looked around at the 12 young. Their eyes were bright with excitement. Their tails lashed back and forth. They were enjoying this. They thought they were about to prove something important. "I appreciate the demonstration," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. "But may I offer one in return?" Laughed. The sound was harsh and young. The other cubs joined in. The corridor filled with mocking laughter. "What could you demonstrate?" asked when the laughter died down. "Your species has no claws, no fangs, no war cry worth hearing. You are soft and small and—" He stopped speaking, just his name. That was all she said, but something was different. Her voice was barely above a whisper. There was no anger in it, no fear, no challenge, just his name spoken softly. But something in that voice made the laugh die in his throat. She was looking directly at him. Her dark eyes were very still, and in that moment felt something he had never felt before. He felt seen, not the way prey sees a predator, something else, something deeper. It was like discovering that something had been watching you for a very long time, and you had never known it was there. Turned slightly, she spoke the name the same way, soft, quiet, almost gentle. His growl stopped, her fur flattened against her body. "Thrain." The cub behind went still. "Mox." "Another one." "Sora." She moved through the circle, nomming each cub in turn. Her voice never rose, she never raised a hand, she never made any threatening gesture. She simply looked at each young and spoke their name. And one by one, they stopped growling. One by one, their battle-ready stances relaxed. One by one, they went very quiet. When she finished, the corridor was completely silent. 12 young stood frozen in place. They did not look at her. They did not look at each other. They simply stood there, breathing quickly, trying to understand what had just happened. "Volume is not the only path to power," said. Her voice was still soft. "A roar announces that you are coming. It gives your enemy time to prepare, time to run, time to steel themselves." She paused. "But when someone speaks your name like I just did, they are telling you something else." She picked up her from the ledge. "They are telling you that they have been watching, they have been listening, they know you, they knew you before you even realized they were paying attention," she looked at. "That is a very different kind of power, do you understand?" Could not speak, his throat felt tight. Walked forward, the cubs in her path moved aside without thinking. They did not plan to move. Their bodies simply responded. She walked through the group and continued down the corridor. She did not look back. For a long time, none of the cubs moved. They stood in the hallway like statues. Their minds were trying to process what had happened. They had come to make the humans submit. They had come to prove their strength. Instead, they had learned something. They had learned that there were kinds of strength they had never imagined. There were kinds of power that had nothing to do with claws or fangs or loud voices. Finally found his voice, it came out rough and uncertain. What was that?" No one answered, no one knew. His legs were shaking. She sat down on the stone floor. "She knew my name, I never told her my name." "She knew all our names," Thrain said quietly. "How did she know all our names?" Thought about the humans' eyes, how still they had been, how calm. There had been no fear in them, not even a little. Not even when she was surrounded by 12 young predators who could have torn her apart. Why was there no fear? Because she had never been in danger. That was the answer that came to him slowly. She had walked into their trap completely calm because she had never, for one moment, been in danger. She had known exactly what she was doing. She had known exactly what would happen. They thought they were hunting her, but she had been watching them the whole time. The cubs were very late for training that morning. When they finally arrived at the arena, was angry. He made them do extra exercises. He made them practice their roars until their throats were sore. But something had changed. Their roars did not feel as powerful as before. Their voices did not feel as strong. They kept thinking about the human. They kept remembering how she had whispered their names. They kept feeling the strange sensation of being truly seen for the first time in their lives. Practiced his battle cry with the others. He roared as loud as he could. But in his mind, a quiet voice was asking a question. What good was a roar against an enemy who already knew everything about you? He had no answer. Night came slowly on. The 3 moons rose one after another. Their pale light fell through the windows of the training facility. The day's lessons were over. The staff had gone to their rest. The corridors were empty and quiet. But in the cubs' sleeping quarters, no one was sleeping. Walked through the door and stopped. He had come to check on his students before going to his own rest. He expected to find them play fighting. He expected to hear them practicing their roars. He expected the noise and energy that Young always had at this hour. Instead, he found silence. The cubs sat in small groups. They spoke in whispers. Their ears were flat against their heads. Their tails hung low and still. Something was very wrong. "What happened?" demanded. His voice was loud in the quiet room. The cubs looked at each other. No one wanted to speak first. Finally stood up. The silver in his mane caught the moonlight. "We challenged the human," he admitted, "this morning before training." Sighs narrowed. "You did what?" "We surrounded her in the corridor. We wanted to make her submit with our roars. We wanted to make her run." His voice was heavy with confusion. "We wanted to show her what truly sound like. And she spoke our names." Waited for more. When nothing came, he growled with frustration. "She named you, that is all. This is what has you acting like frightened prey." "You do not understand." His voice dropped even lower. "When she said my name, I felt something I have never felt before. I felt seen, not the way prey sees a predator coming. Something else, something worse." He struggled to find the right words. It was like realizing that something had been watching you your whole life. It was like knowing that something out there understood everything about you, and you never knew it was there. The other cubs were nodding. Their eyes were wide. Looked around the room. He saw 24 young warriors who had been shaken to their bones. These were not weak cubs, they were the best of their generation. They had never shown fear of anything. But they were showing fear now. This troubled the old warrior deeply. He left the sleeping quarters without another word. He walked through the empty corridors, thinking. His claws clicked against the stone floor. His mind worked through what he had heard. A human had defeated 12 of his best cubs. She had done it without touching them. She had done it without raising her voice. She had done it with nothing but their names. How was this possible? He found the human on the observation deck. She stood alone, watching the 3 moons rise over the red desert. Her small figure was dark against the silver light. "What did you do to my cubs?" asked. He did not waste time with greetings. Turned to face him, her expression was calm. "I introduced myself properly." "They are frightened. Cubs do not frighten easily. I have trained warriors for 40 years. I have never seen anything like this." "What exactly did they tell you?" "They said you spoke their names. They said it made them feel seen. They could not explain it better than that. Neither can I." Was quiet for a moment. She looked up at the old warrior. He was more than twice her height. His claws could have cut her in half with one strike. His fangs were longer than her fingers. But she showed no fear of him either. "May I ask you something, master?" she said. "Ask." "In all your conquests, in all your wars, in all your long life of battle, have you ever faced a human army?" Thought about this. He searched his memories. They had fought many species over the centuries. They had conquered worlds. They had built an empire, but humans. "No," he admitted. "Our empires have never gone to war. There have been border disputes, small conflicts, nothing more." "Have you ever wondered why?" His mane bristled. He had never thought about it. They were mighty. The humans were small and soft. It had simply never seemed important. "There is a reason," said quietly. "There is a reason our species have never fought a real war. There is a reason your empire and ours have kept peace for 200 years. "What reason?" Looked back at the moons. "Your species announces itself, you roar, and your enemies know you are coming. You give them a chance to prepare, you give them a chance to flee, you give them a chance to make peace before the killing starts." She paused. "This is honorable, there is much good in it. But humans do not announce ourselves. We watch, we listen. We learn names and faces, we remember everything, and when we finally move," she turned back to, her dark eyes were very still. "There is no warning, there is no chance to prepare, there is no chance to flee, there are only consequences." Felt his fur rising along his spine. It was a reaction he could not control. His body was responding to a threat his mind could not see. "You are saying your species is? What, predators? You do not look like predators." "The loudest thing in the jungle is not always the most dangerous," said. "Sometimes the most dangerous thing is the one that makes no sound at all." Thought about this. He thought about the human standing before him. She was small, she was soft. She had no claws, no fangs, no mane. She could not roar, she could not fight. By every measure he knew she was weak. But she had defeated 12 of his cubs with a whisper. "When you spoke their names," he said slowly, "what were you really telling them?" "I was telling them that I had been watching. I was telling them that I knew who they were before they even saw me. I was telling them that they had never been the hunters." His voice was soft. "They had always been the hunted, they just did not know it." Said nothing. He looked out at the 3 moons. He thought about all the wars he had fought. He thought about all the enemies he had roared at before killing them. He had always believed that showing strength was everything. He had always believed that announcing yourself was the way of true warriors. But now he wondered, what if there were enemies out there who did not announce themselves? What if there were enemies who watched and waited in silence? What if there were enemies who struck without warning, who knew everything about you before you even knew they existed? How would you fight such an enemy? How would you even know they were there? "Your cubs will recover," said gently. "They learned something important today, something that will make them wiser, something that might one day save their lives." What did they learn? They learned that the universe is bigger than they thought. They learned that there are kinds of strength they never imagined. She smiled slightly. They learned to watch the quiet ones. Looked down at the small human. For the first time in his long life, he felt something like respect for a species he had always dismissed as weak. "You are a strange people," he said finally. "Yes, agreed, we are." She turned and walked away. Her footsteps made no sound on the stone floor. stood alone on the observation deck for a long time. He watched the moons move slowly across the sky. He thought about silence and strength and the power of speaking someone's name. He did not sleep well that night. He kept dreaming of eyes watching him from the darkness, eyes that knew his name. Word spread through the training facility like fire through dry grass. The story changed and grew as it passed from mouth to mouth. By the third day, everyone had heard some version of what happened in the corridor. The cubs who had challenged the human became celebrities. Other young followed them around, asking questions. What had she done? What had it felt like? Was it true that she had some kind of strange power? The answers were always the same. She had not done anything. She had not touched them. She had not threatened them. She had just known their names. She had just looked at them and spoken. And somehow that had been enough. The older did not know what to make of these stories. Some laughed and said the cubs were exaggerating. Some said the human must have used some kind of technology. Some said it was all nonsense. But those who had met were not so sure. There was something about the human, something in her calm eyes, something in her quiet voice, something that made you feel like she knew more than she was saying. 2 weeks after the incident in the corridor, more humans arrived on. The Empire and the Terran Confederacy were beginning important trade negotiations. A human delegation had come to discuss terms. They were led by an elderly man named Thomas Way. He had white hair and a gentle face. He walked slowly and spoke softly. He smiled at everyone he met. The officers prepared for the negotiations the way they always did. They stood tall. They showed their fangs. They let their growls rumble deep in their chests. These were dominance displays. They were meant to show the humans who was strong. The humans nodded politely. They made small talk. They asked about the weather and the food and the architecture of the facility. They did not seem impressed. They did not seem frightened. They did not seem anything at all. Ambassador led the delegation. He was a legendary warrior. His mane was thick and golden. His claws had taken the lives of 200 enemies. His roar had broken the spirits of entire armies. He sat across the negotiation table from Thomas Way. The human looked small and fragile in his simple gray clothes. His hands were soft and unwrinkled. He had never fought a battle in his life. But he remembered names. Every officer who entered the room, Thomas Way greeted by name. He remembered their ranks. He remembered their home worlds. He remembered small details from conversations they had barely noticed having. "Captain," he said to one officer, "how is your daughter? I understand she just completed her first year of pilot training." Stopped walking, he stared at the old human. "How do you know about my daughter?" "You mentioned her at the welcome dinner 3 days ago. You said you were very proud of her." Thomas Way smiled warmly. "I hope she is doing well." Did not know what to say. He mumbled something polite and took his seat. His fur was standing on end. This happened again and again. Every who entered was greeted personally. Every name was remembered. Every small detail was recalled. The humans knew things about the officers that even their fellow did not know. Grew more and more unsettled as the negotiations continued. He was used to intimidating other species. He was used to his size and his fangs and his deep voice giving him power. But none of it seemed to work on these humans. Thomas Way never raised his voice. He never made threats. He never showed any emotion except gentle friendliness. But somehow he always seemed to be in control of the room. On the 5th day of negotiations, finally asked the question that had been bothering him. "Your species has no concept of dominance displays," he said. It was not really a question. "You do not show strength the way other species do." "Oh, we have dominance displays," Thomas Way replied. His smile did not change. "Ours are just quieter." "What does that mean?" The old human thought for a moment. He folded his soft hands on the table. "Let me ask you something, Ambassador. When a roars, what message does that send?" "That we are strong," answered immediately. "That we are to be respected, that we are dangerous." "Exactly, you are broadcasting your capabilities. You are telling your enemy what you can do. You are showing them your power." Thomas Way nodded slowly. "This is clear, this is honest. There is honor in it." But consider the enemy who says nothing. Consider the enemy who simply watches and listens. Consider the enemy who gives no indication of their capabilities, their numbers, their plans." Felt his claws scraping against the table beneath his hands. "That enemy could be anywhere," Thomas Way continued. His voice was still gentle, still soft. That enemy could be anyone. That enemy could have been watching you for years. They could already know everything about you, and you would never know what they were capable of until it was far too late. The room was very quiet. That, Thomas Way said, is a human dominance display. Looked at the old man across the table. For the first time he truly looked. He saw the calm eyes, he saw the patient smile, he saw the absolute stillness. And he understood. The humans were not weak because they did not roar. The humans were terrifying because they did not need to. They watched, they waited, they remembered, and when they finally moved, their enemies never saw them coming. "How long have you been watching us?" asked quietly. "Watching you specifically, about 3 years, watching your species in general," Thomas Way smiled. "Longer than you might think." The negotiations concluded a week later. The terms were fair to both sides. They had come expecting to intimidate their way to better deals. Instead, they had found themselves negotiating as equals with an enemy they could not read. They had shown their fangs, they had displayed their claws, they had let their growls fill the room. And the humans had smiled politely and remembered their names. On the last night found himself on the observation deck. The 3 moons have hung in the sky, the red desert stretched out below. Thomas Way was already there. "I must ask you something," said, "something that has been troubling me. Of course, if our species ever went to war, who would win?" The old human was quiet for a long time. He watched the moons move slowly across the sky. "I hope we never find out," he said finally. "I truly do, because a war between our peoples would be terrible beyond imagining. You would roar and charge and fight with all your might. You would be magnificent." He turned to look at. His gentle eyes were suddenly very serious. "But we would not be there when you charged. We would not be where you expected. We would know your names and your plans and your weaknesses. We would strike from nowhere and vanish into nothing." He paused. "You would never see us coming. You would never know where we were. You would fight shadows until there was nothing left to fight." Said nothing. "This is why I hope for peace," Thomas Way continued. "This is why I remember names and faces and small details, because every I know personally is I do not want to fight. Every name I remember is a life I want to protect." He smiled sadly. "The same power that makes us dangerous also makes us capable of friendship. The same watching that could be used for war can be used for peace." He bowed slightly to the ambassador. "I hope we will always be friends, I truly do." Then he walked away into the quiet night. Stood alone under the 3 moons. He thought about power and silence. He thought about watching and waiting. He thought about the small, soft humans who could defeat you without ever raising their voice. And for the first time in his life, he was glad they were allies. The treaty was signed on a bright morning. Representatives from both species gathered in the great hall of the training facility. There was ceremony and speeches and the pressing of seals into official documents. When it was done, the Inhumans shook hands and clasped claws. History had been made. But the real change had already begun, in a quieter place. On the final day before the human delegation departed, she walked through the familiar corridors toward the training arena. The red sun painted everything in shades of copper and gold. The cubs saw her coming. Word passed quickly through their ranks. By the time she reached the arena entrance, all 24 were waiting for her. They did not surround her this time. They did not growl or show their fangs. They simply stood together in a loose group, watching her with serious young eyes. Stepped forward. His silver-touched mane had grown thicker in the weeks since their first meeting. He was taller now, almost at his full adult height. But something else had changed too. Something in his eyes was different. He bowed his head slightly. It was a gesture used only for honored elders, only for those who had earned their deep respect. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what you showed us." "And what did you decide?" asked. "A roar tells your enemy you are coming. It gives them time to prepare. It is honest and clear." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But when you spoke our names, you told us something different. You told us you had been watching. You told us you knew who we were before we even knew you were there." "Yes. That is frightening." His voice was steady. "But it is not only frightening. There is something else there too, something I did not understand at first." "What is it?" "When you said my name, I felt seen, really seen, not as prey, not as a threat, just as myself." He struggled to express what he meant. It was like you cared enough to learn who I was, like I mattered enough to remember. Smiled. It was the first real smile the cubs had ever seen from her. You understand, she said softly. I think so. The same power that makes your species dangerous also makes you capable of something else, something good. That is the secret, the real secret. Looked around at all the young watching her. When I name someone, I am telling them something important. I am saying that I see them, that I know them, that they matter enough to remember. For enemies, this is terrifying, but for friends. For friends, it is a gift, finished. The greatest gift you can give someone. The cubs murmured among themselves. They were beginning to understand something that would change them forever. They were beginning to see a different kind of strength. Stepped forward, her voice was hopeful. Will you teach us to remember names like you do, to watch and listen and truly see? I can teach you to observe. I can teach you to remember. I can teach you to be present and aware. The expression grew serious. But I must warn you, it changes things. Once you start truly seeing people instead of just seeing threats and prey, you cannot go back. The universe becomes larger, more complex, more beautiful and more painful at the same time. The cubs looked at each other. There was a long moment of silence. Then sat down on the arena floor. One by one, the other cubs did the same. They formed a circle around the human woman. Good, said firmly. Roaring is for cubs. We want to learn what comes after. From the entrance of the arena, a shadow fell across the floor, stood there, watching. His old eyes took in the scene before him. His students, the warriors he had been training for years, sat in a circle around a small, soft human with no claws and no fangs. And they were ready to learn from her. His first instinct was anger. This was wrong. This was not how warriors were trained. They should be practicing their battle cries, not sitting at the feet of an alien. But then he remembered his own conversation with the human. He remembered the 3 moons and the quiet words. He remembered the feeling of being truly seen for the first time. He remembered what it felt like to realize there was more to strength than he had ever imagined. Slowly, the old master walked into the arena. His students turned to look at him with uncertain eyes. They expected him to be angry. They expected him to send the human away. Instead, sat down with them. Then teach me as well, he rumbled. His voice was gruff but sincere. I find I am tired of roaring at an uncaring universe. I would like to learn another way. Looked at the old warrior. She saw the doubt in his eyes. She saw the hope, too. She saw someone who had spent his whole life believing one thing and was now brave enough to consider something new. Learning to truly see is the work of a lifetime, she said gently. But it starts with one simple thing. What? It starts with caring. It starts with deciding that the people around you matter enough to remember. It starts with paying attention not just to threats, but to stories. Not just to power, but to personhood. She looked around the circle. 24 cubs and 1 old warrior looked back at her. Shall I tell you what I see right now? Shall I tell you what I have learned about each of you? The cubs nodded eagerly, even leaned forward slightly. And in a voice barely louder than a whisper began. She talked about quiet uncertainty beneath his confidence. She talked about fierce loyalty to her friends. She talked about Thrain's desperate need to prove himself and Mox's hidden wisdom. She talked about each cub in turn, describing not their fighting skills or their roaring ability, but who they truly were. When she finished, many eyes were wet with tears that were not supposed to shed. You knew all this, said, his voice was rough. From watching us, just from paying attention. Yes. And you remembered. Always smiled. Because you mattered, because every single one of you mattered. The training on changed after that day. Oh, the cubs still learned to fight. They still practiced their battle cries. These things were still part of tradition. But they also learned something new. They learned to watch and listen. They learned to remember names and stories. They learned that true strength was not just about what you could destroy, but about what you could understand. Years passed. The cubs grew into adults. They became warriors and diplomats and leaders. They spread across the empire, carrying what they had learned with them. Became one of the greatest diplomats they ever produced. He negotiated treaties that prevented wars. He remembered every name he ever heard. He truly saw the people he dealt with, and because of this, they trusted him. When asked about his methods, he always gave the same answer. I learned from a human that the most dangerous sound in the universe is someone speaking your name. They taught me that the same power that makes humans terrifying also makes them the most loyal friends you could ever have. He would pause and smile. They taught me that anyone can roar. It takes real strength to whisper and still be heard. The Terran Alliance became one of the most stable partnerships in known space. It lasted for centuries. Historians would later write that it began not with shows of force or displays of power, but with a moment of silence in a dusty corridor. It began when a human woman whispered 12 names and changed the universe. Some nights, when it was old and gray, he would stand under the 3 moons of. He would remember that morning in the corridor. He would remember the feeling of being truly seen for the first time. And he would whisper a name into the darkness. The woman who taught that the quietest voice in the room could be the most powerful of all. The woman who proved that strength was not about being heard. It was about being remembered.